Okay, good morning. So we're up to a new siman, Siman Shin Yud Aleph, and what we're going to be talking about today is the halachas of a mace on Shabbos. If there's a mace, if there's a dead body on Shabbos, in terms of muktzah, how you deal with it. So says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph, Meis shemutel b'mokum sheyare olav b'pnei adleika. If you have a mace, a corpse, and you're worried that it might be consumed by fire for some reason, Im yesh kikar etinak metaltle al yedehem, and you need to therefore move the mace. Chazal allowed you to move the mace on Shabbos, which is a very high level of muktzah, by putting a kikar, a loaf of bread, or a tinuk on the mace, and then it becomes like a bossis to move the kikar or the tinuk. If you mainly kikar or tinuk, and if you haven't got a loaf of bread, or you haven't got a child to do this, then im yesh le shtei mitos, if there are two beds, you can move the mace from bed one to the other bed, and then you move the bed over, and then you move it to and you keep just moving it like imagine there was a stretcher. You keep moving it, and it's tiltum and atzad. It's like an indirect way of moving it. You haven't got a kicker and tinnik, or you haven't got the shtei mitos, then metaltele tiltul gomer. Then you're allowed to just carry the mace away normally. And the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain, because when it comes to a dleika, a fire, we're worried a person is bahul al mamoino, and he's worried and he gets all confused, and therefore we just allow you to move the mace. That's only when you're carrying in one rishus. And we'll see more about that in a minute. Meis hamutal b'chamo. If Rachman Islam, you've got a mace and it's mutal b'chamo, it's exposed to the sun, then you're allowed to move it as well. Metaltle mechama letzel. You're allowed to move it into the shade, from the sun into the shade. But oisei rishus, in that rishus, al yidei kika etinik, again by way of a kika etinik, a loaf of bread or a child. V'im ein lo kika etinik, and you haven't got that lo yitaltel niklal. Now here, you haven't got the dleika, you've just got mechama letzel. So then, if you haven't got the kikar tinuk, then you can't move it. Afilu lahafcha memita lemita, even to move it from one bed to the next. The tiltum and atzad shmei tiltul, because at the end of the day, tiltum and atzad is considered moving muktzah, and that we do not allow. V'ayin lekam siman zeh sivav ma'itakanze, what you can do. Okay, let's do the Mishnah Berurah. Kikar tinuk, says the Mishnah Berurah. It doesn't have to be a kikar, a tinuk. The main point is that you're using the mace to transport this item. And the reason why they allow this and they don't allow you to move it directly is whatever you can do to minimize moving muktzah, Chazal wanted you to do. Al yadehem. Vahainu, so how does it work with the kikar or with the tinok? Vahainu shemeniach alav etzloi. You put the loaf of bread, let's say, or the tinok, on the mace, or etzloi, or next to the mace, or metaltele limoi. V'lo minka kol kach tiltela muksa, af shegama mace for muksa. And it doesn't look like you're moving the muksa so much, even though of course the mace is muksa. You're transporting both. You're transporting the item that is on the mace, and it looks less in your face, less direct, that you're carrying just the mace alone. This whole hatter, this whole idea of a kicker or tinuk is dafka used for a mace, to allow you to move the mace in a case where the mace is in a situation of disgrace. But no other muksa like even Now, if you take a look at footnote number 2, yeah, he says something interesting. We pay kovat hames. Now we've got a choice. He says either olav or etzlo. Where do you put the kikkar? Do you put it on the mace or next to the mace? So in number 2, he says we pay kovat hames. Kosav gesher Chaim, the famous sefer on Hilchos Avelus. It's better not to put the kikar or the tinuk on the mace, rather put it on the side, where there is a possibility to put it on the side. So imagine you've got a stretcher, better to put the kikar or tinuk on the side of the mace, not on it, because it's more respectful for the mace. Now, the interesting sentence here. The whole svara, the whole heta, to carry the mace when there is a dova muta on top of it, or next to it, the svara is that when I'm carrying something which I'm allowed to carry, for example a kikar, and I'm only doing it by way of this muktzah item, i.e. the mace, it looks like the mace is a bosses for this davar heta, and therefore my moving the mace is not really l'tzorech ha-mace, it's just l'tzorech the davar heta, and therefore it's just a hechatimtza to try and minimize the concern of muktzah. Yeah.
Let's say you need the koima.
Oh, we're coming to that. Very good. Yeah, this and more to come. Okay, let's carry on. So the first idea of the mechaber is that you move the mace by way of a kikkar tinok. You carry the mace and you put a kikkar tinok on or next to the mace. If you haven't got a kikkar tinok or something else, then you can move it mimitza lamita, which is tiltum minat sad. So says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Kotan Gimel minat sad. Va'afal gav the tiltum minat sad gam kein shmei tiltul. Even though, as we say later, that when you move something which is a tiltum minat sad, it's still called a tiltul. Commercial cost of sifches. Mikol makom bedleike hitiru. They allow this tiltum minat sad in the case of a fire. Mitam the odom bol al meisoi. That a person is very bohol al meisoi, is very confused, and ve'ilo sharisle also lichbuye. And if you don't allow him to move the mace out, the person will come to extinguish the fire. Okay, so therefore they're allowed tiltum minat sad because you may come to be mechaber to extinguish the fire. Now, what about moving the bed or the stretcher after the mace has been taken off it? Tolu b'zeh, it depends on the following. If the person was alive ben hashmoshes, then you can move the bed or the mitzvah, the stretcher, afterwards. The lo nasis bosses the mace, because it never became a bosses for the mace, given the lo iskutza ben hashmoshes, because the person was alive at ben hashmoshes and therefore it never became a muktzah. Ach in mace be'erev Shabbos, but if the person had already died by erev Shabbos, harosh oisev ha'ma'er matzeh. Then, if the mace is no longer on the mitzvah or the stretcher, then the Rosh says it's also, and the Ma'ar, the Balamar says it's mutter. If your intention was that the mace would stay there all of Shabbos, and then later the mace was moved, everyone agrees that the bed will become a bosses, but also the and you cannot move it. Okay. Now, we only allow you to move it ba'isa rishus. We'll come to all your points in a sec. Ba'isa rishus. Mashma mizeh to the rishus acher also lahitzi b'chol gavni. The implication of the simple reading of the mechaber is that moving it to a different rishus is always also. Aval harba achrenim miskimu. Ta'afilu rishus acher sheli irvu imzeh or lekarmelis shari lahitzi b'nei bizoyin hameis. To allow you to move it where there is an issa hitzah midrabanon, for example, to a place where there is no eruv, or to a karmelis, then that would be okay. And whether or not you need a kicker or a tinnik to do that type of hotzah, that depends on the two opinions which we're going to come to in Sif Beis. The Mechaber actually agrees to that. And when he says that Rishus, Rotzolema, Shekosavnu milsa the psika the tzorich lechatchila kika etinek udavka ba'is rishus. When do you need a kika etinek? If it's in that rishus, avol kashemetzil rishus acher. But when you're taking the mace into another rishus, kugoyin shadleiku b'chol hachotze for huchruch loitzim misham. The fire is consuming the whole chotze, and you need to take the mace out of there. Oz lav milsa the psiki. Then it's not sort of categoric. If you're taking it out into a different rishus, then actually on the contrary, it's better not to take a kikkar tinuk because you've got other problems of hitzah. You're carrying the kikkar tinuk. Okay, and then we said if that was all if you're worried about a deleicha. But if you're worried about the mace being mutal b'chama, then you're allowed to move the mace with a kikkar tinuk, but not tiltum minat sad. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Kotan Hey, Mairi shadayin lo hisriach. the body has not yet decayed. If you're wired in the heat of the sun, the body may decay. That's why the Mechaber says, Dafka in that Rishus you can take it out. The time of Beresh Sif base. The heavy Das Rashi V'tur, even when it's out in the sun and it's close to it, it might begin a decaying process. That the Ramah would say that even then, even if it hasn't decayed yet, but it may decay, you're allowed to take it to a different rishus, and that is in fact how the Bach paskins to be makel. Shmeitil to limitam zeh also litchayf al yedei kano, you can't push by way of a beam or something. Davashel muksa achim dchifaso hu mepnei shetzarich leishtamish b'makom shemunach hamamuksa. Oh, this is what you were saying, Yossi. But if you need to use the place where the mace was, shari. To have a tiltum l'asad l'tzorich dava amutza uchad l'kam b'sif ches. That was your point. V'ayin le'el b'simin shin ches v'mishabura sif cotton kuf tesvav. Okay, so that's sif aleph. Now, what his mishabura referred to a few times is the machlokes in sif base. We won't have time to do all of it, but let's at least begin sif base. Says the Mechaber, Meis shehisriach b'bayis. Rachon Islam, you've got a mace, corpse which is decaying in a house. V'nimsa misbaze, and it's considered it's disgraceful, this is a lack of honor for the mace. Bein hachaim bein hachaim. It's sort of misbaze bein hachaim. It's considered dishonorable amongst those who are alive. V'heim misbaze mimenu, and they also find it disgracing them, not only for the mace but for the chaim. V'yesh oimrim da'afilu le'isriach adayin, even if it hasn't yet decayed, adayin ela shekorov lasriach, it's getting close to that point. Mutza lo'yitzir le'karmelis, you're allowed to take the mace into a karmelis. V'im hoya lohem mokum lotzeis boi, if there is a place where the people can go, then ein motzir nosei, let the mace stay in that room and let the people move. Ela menichin osei b'mkoimo v'yotzim mitzom, you leave the mace there and people leave. V'yesh oimrim shelo yitiru lots le'tzir le'karmelis ela alizei kikar tinok. And others say that you can only move it out into a karmelis where there's an issa drabonon to carry by way of a kikar tinok. V'yesh misha omer shekol shem yitzir le'karmelis mutav le'tzir shelo b'kikar tinok kadei l'ma'ativ beitzah. And some say no, if you're going out to a karmelis which involves an issa drabonon of carrying, better not to take the kikar tinok because you want to minimize your carrying prohibitions. That there are those who allow you to carry the mace even into a Rosh Hashanah, which is an Issa Deraisa of carrying, if you've got a tinnik on top of it. But there they don't allow the kicker, because there the tinnik is Chai Nosei Etzatzma, and therefore you're not involved in the Issa of carrying, and the mace is bottled to the tinnik, but not by way of a kicker. There's another type of disgrace. For example, you're on a boat, and you've got a sort of non-Jewish crowd gathering around the mace. Okay, let's stop there. Let's just do the Mishnah Berurah till there. Now, why are you allowed to do that? To Godel Kovod Abriyos. Because, as the well-known rule, Godel Kovod Abriyos Shadeicha Lo Yisaseh D'Divreihem. The Godel Kovod Abriyos, the honor for a human being, even for a mace, is so great that it can push aside the Lo Yisaseh D'Divreihem and Drabonon D'Kalav. U'mashe Kosav V'im Hoya Lohem Mokum Hudas HaRambam. That viewpoint, that if there's another place for them to go to, is the view of the Rambam. He holds the main reason is not for the mace, but for the people who are alive. It's considered dishonorable for the living people to be in the same room as the mace, and and if they've got a place for the people to go to, they should go there. And then ein motzina, so you don't need to take the mace out. Levad aside from the case of a mace on a ship, also b'seif hasif, which we came to later on in the sif, sham hu bizayin gadol the mace k'sheinam yehudim is asvim svivoisov v'choshu lichvoidei. It's a lack of the covet of the mace if sort of you've got a whole crowd gathering around this mace. Mashein should be put quietly in a place where it's an honourable resting place for it until you get to the kfura. Mashein ken hacha leka bizayin kol kach Lemeis kivin shemunach b'makom she'ein roin, because at the end of the day it's sitting in a bedroom somewhere or something like that, and that's not disgraceful. V'oid kivin shekvai sriach, since the decay has begun, v'dal dasa yeshem hanal shemekilim b'karav lasriach, they allow you, even like we said in the Ramah, even if it's karav lasriach, afilu yesh laim makom lotzeis mutzah lo yitzia mipnei shelo yasriach. If you're allowed to move it in a situation where you're worried about decay. Ches ela al yedei kikar tahitzah di efshel tikkunei shari. If you can't fix it, it's mutter. Avol tilted the efshel tikkunei al yedei kikar maskin. If you can do it by way of a kicker, then you should do that. Mutav lahitzi sifkat tes. I am be'eli rabbi shechriya kadei rishayna mishum sheharbe poiskim soivrim kameisa. Mikol makom nearly kashe'ein lo kikar v'tinoik. If there is no kicker v'tinoik, mutav lahitzi af lo kicker v'tinoik. You're allowed to move it. The after day rishayna ein hechresh to lekuva. It's not ma'akev. I am a Mogan Avram, Sif Cotton Ches, or Eli Rabba Sif Cotton Zayin. Okay. Now, then the Mechaba says, Yesh Misha Omer, that you can even move it, L'Rishus HaRabim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sif Cotton Yud. Time, though, the reason is, for you to be over the deraisa of carrying, it's got to be a Melacha Shesricha L'Gufa. Here, moving the mace is a Melacha She'en Esricha L'Gufa. Why? To Ein Sorech L'Mace, you don't need the mace to be in place B from place A. And therefore, since it's Malach Shein Tzrich L'Gufa, according to Reb Shimon, who we paskin like, it's only a drabonon. And that drabonon is pushed aside because of Kovod Abrius. But the first opinion only allowed you to carry the mace into a carmelis where there is no Ketzah Midaraisa. Mashen came bezeh mishum the shem malach aleh ela she'ein tzricha l'gufa. Mashen came. This opinion says that you're allowed to carry because it's not really carrying deraisa because it's malach she'ein tzricha l'gufa. Lo yitiru af b'meis, and that's a special heter for mace. Ein betaz v'chein be'eli rabba ta'alocha kadei rishayna mishum dahar be'poiskim seivrim kameisa of a prat to malach she'ein tzricha l'gufa gamkein lo brira lo depat aleh. That we paskin like you're allowed to carry it into the Carmelis and not into Rishus Rabim because it's not so clear cut. This Malach Shein Tzrich L'Gufa. The Yesh Poskin Rabbi Yehuda the Mechayev Ale'ayim B'Soif Siman Shin Lamed Dalet. The Rambam famously paskins like Rabbi Yehuda that Malach Shein Tzrich L'Gufa Yochayev, and therefore we don't allow you to carry the mace into Rishus Rabim. Okay, just one more Sif Katan. Al Yedei Tinoik. Dafka Kashehu Godel K'tas. This Tinoik has got to be. It can't be very small. The shaykh by Chai Noises Atzmai. He's got to be able to apply the rule of Chai Noises Atzmai. But if it's a 3-month-old baby, he can't walk anyway, and therefore you can't apply the rule of Chai Noises Atzmai. V'leslei baile rak ba'alma rak isadrabonin of a mace le gazru. Mashenkin bekotten b'yoseh. If the child is very small, is a baby. Then who shavel a kicker, he's got the same din as the kicker. For chayiv al hoitzah gufa, and then you're going to be chayiv on the hoitzah. Okay, we've got 5 minutes. Maybe we should just finish the Ramah. It's only 2 lines. All right, let's just finish the Ramah. It says the Ramah Hagah. V'hu adin to matarim lo malen Yehudi latatlik malidei kikav v'tineg. So too, and this is quite motzui. You can tell a non-Jewish person to carry or to move the mace in the same way that you can use a kikkar or tineg. But you can't move the mace just because there are kohanim there. But to tell a non-Jewish person to move the mace because there are kohanim there, that is allowed. Or any other reason of a mitzvah or a chasna that you need it's in a place which is spoiling where the chuppah will be or something like that. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah Yud Beis. V'uadin the mutarim kamar alidei kikav v'tinok. Rotzolema kamoishe tir b'Yisrael alidei kikav v'tinok hitiru alidei Yehudi af bali kikav v'tinok. Just like we allowed the Yisrael to move the mace if you've got a kikar or tinok on the mace or next to the mace, so too they allow you to use a non-Jewish person to move the mace on Shabbos, even without a kikar tinok. To ask the non-Jewish person to move the mace into a carmelis where there's no issa hitzah deraisa. They don't allow you, the non-Jewish person, to move it. There are those who allow you, the non-Jewish person, to move even if it's into Rishus Rabim, but most allow only an Issa Drabon of carrying. Now he says a very interesting footnote in footnote 13. What's the svara for that? He says, why don't we allow the non-Jewish person to move it even to a deraisa? Because it's a melach shein tzricha legufa, but that's considered an isur chamur, k'muvur b'halacha, v'chein tzion b'shat tzion. Now, what about asking the non-Jewish person to activate the air conditioning? You want to minimize the Kadesh Yisriach. So he says in the third paragraph in footnote 13, "Ulahafil mazgano ma'aver alidei nochri b'chedesh sheni." Sorry, b'chedesh sheboy nimsa hameis da'asakon rizon kares she'osa. He doesn't allow you. Why? Hoyel ve'isa hadova midaraisa, because the Chazon Ish says that activating air conditioning could be an issa deraisa. However, he doesn't have He says if it's already on, you can tell the non-Jewish person to turn it up or something, but not more than that. Okay, let's just finish off. What about telling the non-Jewish person to move it to Tzorech Kehanim? Sif Kotten Yud Gimel. Sheyiu yecholim liyos bebateim shiu tachas agag echad im hameis. Because moving the mace is got to be for the benefit of the mace and not for the other people. To move the mace from one bed to another, that would be allowed for the kohanim, even not using a kicker tinuk. The hari who tilts them in atzad l'tzorech mekayme deshari. V'chudulekam sifhei. Umikol mokum. Bein bezeh. Bein b'mashe matze haramo alidei en Yehudi who dafke makrevin roitzin. Interesting. That's only if the family want it. The mishum bizoyin hameis leka bezeh. Because there's no bizoyin hameis. The maluch shematarin also b'bayis zeh b'bayis acher. What difference does it make to the mace if he's in house A or house B? You can't force them to move the mace. Unless the minhag in the town is to move the mace to where they do the tahara. Even if the kohanim can't get to shul because they're all under one gag, to mitzvah, mishum dezel kavod hakrovim shitar v'yasu tzorech hameis bebesom, because it's a kavod for the krovim to do the tahara in their house if that's what they want. Imloi b'nefel deleka mishum kavod. If there's a rachmanis on a nefel, a child who's died within 30 days of its birth, then there's no kavod. Yesh oimim dichonin lekufon lo yitzia min habayis b'shvil hakam. Then you can insist on the family that in order to move the nefel, in order that the kohanim can go to shul, then you're allowed to insist. By way of the mention, the way we did it, as we said above. Okay. Let's finish off. Yudalad l'tzorech mitzvah, the shvus l'tzorech mitzvah, shari, v'chudel b'simen shin zayin sif. Okay. Va'ayin sham. The l'tzorech gadol choshev gam kein tzorech mitzvah, v'lehachi sharin and hacha alidei en Yehudi l'tzorech kahanim v'chein mashem me'agra. That there's also mashem from the gra that l'tzorech to ask a non-Jewish person l'tzorech kahanim, that would be allowed. Say that. Okay.